Thank you very much for joining myself and Josh here for today's session. As you could tell by the title and everything that we registered for here, the goal of today's session is to focus in on what real estate firms are doing to deal with volatility in a market and how to win and how to use technology as a competitive advantage. We hear that all the time with our clients, and none other than Josh is going to be joining us to talk more about that. So before I go through introductions of myself and pass it over to Josh to do the same, I want to call out a couple of things here. Q&A, if you have any questions that come up, just throw them into the chat. If it's applicable directly to the conversation that Josh and I are having, we'll answer it right in line. Otherwise, we might just save that question for the end. And then also, just so that everybody's aware, we are recording today's session. So anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. Totally kidding, of course. But with that, I'll introduce myself. So my name is George. For those that don't know me, I oversee our financial services practice here at Plative. I've been with the firm, I don't know how long everybody's been on here yet, but I was sending this to Josh. I've been here for about 6 years, just under 6 years actually, but I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for about 9 years. So before I was at Plative, I was at Salesforce directly. I was an account executive there on the financial services team back in New York. And before that, I was in the Microsoft ecosystem, also advising financial services firms, a mix of software and services in that role as well. So 12, almost 13 years across numerous different enterprise platforms that are out there and all specific to the financial services space. One thing always rings true, and it's about centralizing into one system. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit as we get into it. But I'll let Josh introduce himself, since of course he's going to be the feature of the conversation here. So Josh.
Yeah, thanks, George. Glad to be here, and thanks for the intro. My name is Josh Goldman. I'm a managing director for Gemdale USA. We're a mixed-use developer here in the United States with about a half dozen offices across major markets, and I oversee our operations in San Diego and Orange County. And my relationship with Plative started about 1.5 years ago as we kind of set our sights on and then embarked on a process to develop a custom piece of software based upon Salesforce to help try to pull together all of our various data points of our business.
Great. Yeah, it's been a fun project working with you guys. And so, you know, as we unpack the conversation here, the first thing that, of course, we wanted to start out with is what role does technology play in Gemdale's entire go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. And I'll kind of start at like the root of our business. I mean, nothing that we do is patented, proprietary. We're not software developers. We're not rocket scientists. You know, success in our business is generally driven by relationships, networking, person-to-person connections, intuition, things like that. And so what we're really trying to do is figure some method behind the madness and kind of, you know, allow ourselves to be able to make intuitive decisions, but in the best way possible. And what I mean by that is this: I just got done reading the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, which was fantastic, and I highly recommend it for anyone. And you know, the thesis of the book is essentially, you know, generally speaking, we make our best decisions intuitively. You know, and there's a subconscious component of our brain that operates and can sort through, you know, vast amount of data and whatever, you know, experience background we have to make really better decisions than most often than we can make, you know, if we sit and take our time and roll through, you know, 1,000 different data points. But with the caveat that you've got to be able to have control of, you know, what those data points are. You've got to have the experience to draw from. You know, and then kind of how do you utilize that to make the best decisions? And there was a great example in the book going back to, and George, you just mentioned you moved to Chicago, so it's a local reference for you. Cook County Hospital in Chicago, you know, handles, I think, like the highest, you know, emergency room volume in the country out of any hospital, at least at the time of the example, which was the mid-90s. And they were seeing just like a tremendous amount of people come through the door complaining of cardiac issues and didn't have the capacity or the funding to handle it all. So they needed some way to kind of, you know, sort through all the mess and figure out, you know, how to prioritize the cases as opposed to sending somebody home that was, you know, maybe an hour from getting a heart attack. And so they ran a number of studies and, work with some folks, outside of the hospital, which the book goes into detail on. And basically found that, you can have this, swath of experienced physicians that can ask a patient 1,000 questions, rely upon their experience, and then make some recommendation as to what level of care that patient's going to get. And obviously you can't put everybody in the highest level of the ICU because you don't have the volume to do it.
Right.
But it basically found that, without drilling down those data points and kind of just allowing those experts to, go through their own process, their accuracy was roughly 50%. So basically, the same accuracy as chance. And so they went through a massive study of all the various data points, and basically, kind of took all the questions that the doctor would typically ask and drilled it down to 3 or 4 key questions. And then from those data points, allow the doctors to, make their decisions. And that took their success rate up to like 85, 90%. And so, kind of back to the idea of, how do we blend the best of both worlds within our businesses? How can we take all the various data points that we have, and they're numerous, match that with, our intuition and experience to allow ourselves to make the best possible business decisions.
Yeah.
And then from there, the process becomes cyclical. So, we get the data, we can make the decisions, and then now we've got the ability to look back on our data, analyze it in a certain way, and understand and get smarter with each go around.
Yeah, exactly. We say that all the time. You've probably heard us and our whole team say it about 400 times through the project too, but data to improve process.
Mm-hmm.
You hear it so frequently. Every company's a data company. It's a commonly said thing now, but what do you actually do with the data? How are you actually going to take that data and turn it into a competitive advantage for you, especially in a heavily competitive market like anything real estate centric? I've got another question related to data, or I should even just say related to technology and how this is all functioning related to process. Has remote work impacted your guys' process, your view into technology at all?
It has, I think, in both positive and negative ways. I think, as evidenced by the fact that we're doing this panel, on Zoom, we've, kind of explored and discovered new ways to utilize this to replace what would typically be done in person. So technology is fantastic from that standpoint. Kind of the downside of it, and within our businesses, I'm sure within yours, is you lose some of the creative collision by not having people in an office having casual conversations and being able to sit across the table from each other. So I think you lose some of that, and I think just because of the interpersonal nature of certain things, it's difficult to have that or recreate it, on Zoom or WebEx or Teams or whatever the case may be. But then I think also, kind of going back to the previous point, because of like this discovery of all these different ways we can utilize Zoom and all the various remote work softwares that we've started to employ over the last few years, I think to a certain extent we've become almost obsessed with the data and the software. And this goes back to my last point, in terms of all the various data points that we have and being able to whittle them down to what's most important.
Right.
We've got all these various pieces of software, so now I think we feel like a certain responsibility to use them, when sometimes they're not necessary. So a big part of our business, and a saying we always use, is that time kills all deals. So going back to the previous point, how do we allow ourselves to have access to all this data or utilize all this software, but do it in the most efficient way possible? So that's a big component as well.
Yeah, streamline the process, make things better, more efficient, and efficiency internally gives a better experience externally to your clients.
Exactly.
Even what you had just said too with data. We talk with clients all the time about how to just think about an integration. To say, I need to integrate all of this information because I need it there. Like, what is it actually giving you? It's not giving you anything. All you're doing is creating this big complex integration, but there's not actually any tangible value that it's going to provide back to the business. So it's a good way of thinking about it, like taking the raw data, like you said, whittling it down to the most important data points. And that's when you're like, this is a perfect integration. This is the information that I need at the fingertips of my producers to make my process smoother, easier, and any other acronym that we might want to throw in there.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Now, back to everything related to the process here. Was there a trigger or pain that got you started on the search of upgrading your system?
Yeah, for me, I've been in this business a long time, and we've all dealt with fat-fingered Excel errors, or information living in people's brains, and what I like to call the hit by a bus philosophy, that you want to create a system that if Joe Schmo or Jane Schmo gets hit by a bus, then the information isn't lost with them. So and it's kind of funny. I mean, I've worked for some of the biggest real estate developers in the world, companies that have hundreds of billions of dollars of assets under management. I've worked for small private developers, and kind of the system has been no different. Everybody uses Excel for their pro formas and their budgets, and everybody uses Microsoft Outlook to as their file storage system with their emails and their documents, and everybody keeps notes in their own way and has to pick up the phone to say, hey, what's going on with the status of this loan, or did you call this person and what did they say? So I've always wanted to try to find a way to kind of bring everything together, and kind of in the same way that on the real estate side, we have these big businesses, we have hundreds of billions of dollars of assets under management, that draw upon all these different disciplines and all these different data points for the consumer. All these companies tend to be really siloed in their operations. One group is not talking to the next, and software has kind of been the same thing, right? I mean, there's all these great pieces of, prop tech out there. There's stuff that helps you with your, property budgeting, and there's stuff that helps you with your cost management system on your capital projects, and there's stuff that helps you with your leasing, and there's stuff that helps you with your project management. But none of it really talks to each other in a really efficient way. There might be one or two things that communicate with something else, but never, the full holistic view of what we do in our business cycle. And so, I joined my current company about 2.5 years ago, and they were kind of going through the process of, well, we need to get our, capital budgeting system out of Excel, and we need to get it, into a piece of, budgeting software. And so, I got involved in leading that committee because I've had a little bit of experience doing that in some other places. And it just kind of felt like one of those situations where instead of trying to solve this the same way it's, been solved, and let's just go find the best piece of budgeting software, what if there were a way, or we could, create something to communicate with, the 6 or 7 or 8 other pieces of software that we use, so that we can start getting feedback that's really useful, that gives us the entire picture of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Much in the same way that I think we can operate our businesses better too, where, we can make business decisions that are based on, the financial component and the property management component and the legal component, instead of having just all those different silos.
Yeah. That actually brings me to my next point. I almost alluded to it there. When you guys, now that you guys are using Salesforce and getting it set up, did Salesforce actually replace anything that you guys were using previously, or did it just connect everything?
Just connected everything.
Yeah. We say that all the time, like you're never going to get rid of Excel.
Yeah.
Always use it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Then kind of going back to my, original point about what we do in our business, is very different than a software company or rocket science. We're all relationships, but I think we can take some really important business lessons from those businesses as well. Facebook, obviously, Meta is one of the most valuable companies, in the world, and tremendously successful. But at their root, why are they so successful? Well, they're effectively the largest consumer database in the world, and they can offer to companies that partner with them access to that database and access to that information, so that they can, target market, the people that they really need to reach. So as real estate developers, you think about it, we are a B2B business, but we're also a B2C business. If we're building an apartment building, we have a treasure trove of information on the people renting apartments from us. And if we're leasing office buildings, we have a treasure trove of information about the companies that we're leasing to. And if we're dealing with architects, contractors, and consultants, we have a treasure trove of information about those vendors and how they operate, and commodities in the construction world. And like I said a couple of times now, I've worked for the largest companies in the world, in real estate, but also those companies dabble in private equity and infrastructure. And so, they might be invested in a business that's, making hardware or, something like that. So we have access to just this tremendous amount of information, but, we very rarely pull it together and use it to our benefit. So it was kind of spurred by this, global idea as to how do we do that?
Yeah. And that's the big thing here with, like, I say it all the time, Salesforce doesn't necessarily need to replace anything that you guys are using. It can just connect the million systems that you guys could be using and give you all of that centralized information. Basically, everything that you had even just talked about, the individual asset, companies that might have a lease written there, whoever helped you from an architect standpoint, developers, you have all that information against one singular asset, and it's viewable in one system instead of having to look at all 7 of those systems. And now you can report on all of it from those multiple systems in one place. And you don't have to call someone and ask them what's going on here, because the notes that they're entering into one system are now going to populate into Salesforce.
Yeah, and meanwhile, you make your teams more efficient too. I mean, you think about having all these different systems. It's not just, double entry, it's triple entry or quadruple entry or, quintuple entry, whatever it is. If you're dealing with, and I'll name names, Yardi, Sage, North Spire, whatever PM software. So if you're making an employee enter information in 5 or 6 different locations, and then the person they're reporting to, because they're 5 or 6 different locations, doesn't know which one to access or doesn't have the time to access all 5, they're going to take the quickest, easiest route and call, text, or email and say, hey, what's the status of this? Now that person, they made 5 or 6 entries, and they're going to answer the phone and have to talk somebody through it. Well, they've lost a lot of efficiency in that manner. So, you also get the byproduct of all this is that you ideally would make your team a lot more efficient.
Yeah. I've been anyone that's been on a call with me in the last 8 years, I have probably said before, you don't want to have to do your job and then tell Salesforce you did your job.
Right.
You want to just do your job in the system and then have it use the process workflows and different automations that are inside of those systems to then serve up what's the next thing that should be done. You talked about intuitive decisions when you're talking about the Malcolm Gladwell book. That's exactly what Salesforce can become. It can actually become intuitive and say, based on what you just entered or based on where this deal is at, this is the next best action to take. And that's really where all of this becomes a cohesive unit.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's only half the battle, right? Developing the system that so you can roll it out and be more efficient, because, the second half of our problem is getting people to utilize it as well. And I remember back when I first started in the business, I was working for a private developer in Washington, D.C. And the first boss I ever had in the business got me really into the philosophy Things to Do by David Allen. I don't know if you've ever read that one.
I know Gladwell, but not that one.
Yeah, it's a good read. I mean, it basically it's an efficiency guide and operates based upon the idea that, if something's out of sight, it's out of mind, and not to clog your brain with a bunch of clutter you don't need to worry about. But at its base, it's a great way to manage like your email inbox. We all have, these massive email inboxes. We get hundreds of emails a day, and, we can get backlogged and things just kind of sit there. And I remember, my boss and I had kind of bought into this method, and we're able to, and I'm still able to this day, to get down to 0 emails at the end of each day. Mm-hmm. And so there was, a specific, leasing broker who worked on our team, and my boss and I were trying to pitch him on the idea of, this guy had like 10,000 unread emails in his inbox. And we're trying to pitch him on the idea of read this book and, follow this method to kind of help sort through the madness. And the feedback was, well, that's not how I make money. I'm not going to spend, an hour, 2 hour, 4 hours, going through this, doing, the sorting process and all that, because that's time I could, be spent making money. And so the reason I'm telling the story is because that's going to be part of our problem, even if we can design a solution that works on the go forward, is teaching our people, to your point, to do your work within the software so that you're not doing it twice. Because I think the immediate reaction of folks is going to be, well, I'm still going to end up with duplicate entry because I'm going to do things the same way I've always done before, and then I'm going to go enter it into Salesforce.
Yeah. You never want that to happen. And that's also where like change management and user training, and even the way that you build the system, you want it to be built for each individual end user. You do a different thing inside of your system than, some of the employees that you're working with. And if everybody has just served up what they're supposed to do next, it should be easy enough where they know that they want to enter their information here because they can go on to the next page on from here. And if they put their information here, it's automatically going to get served up to Josh, and then you could do your job. They don't have to get phone calls from you. But the idea of 10,000 unread emails is causing me a little bit of stress, because I'm the same way too. I actually really like to make sure that I'm using my email inbox as essentially like a task manager. I don't click on an email until I actually have the time to go through emails. I book time in my morning and in my evening go through and I want to make my inbox get down to 0 at the end of every day. If it's something that needs more interaction, I grab it, I create a Slack, I send a message out, and I get the process rolling. So then that way tomorrow, like, people are already aware of it, they're thinking about it, and we can action on it the next day. So
Yeah, exactly right.
yeah. Now, we've talked a lot about like different components and what your team is actually doing inside of the system. Are there any main components that your team has found specific value in this whole journey?
Yeah, look, I think, I mentioned at the onset, we started this process with you guys about 18 months ago. Shortly thereafter, got into the design phase. So, I mean, we're, in the relative infancy of, what we, I think, hope to accomplish with the software, at the company. And I'm very much a believer in the walk before you can run, strategy. We can't try to do everything all at once. So, one of the things I've noticed has been extremely helpful on the project and task management side, where we can collaborate on a series of tasks, communicate through Salesforce, and keep everybody up to date. Instead of, kind of weighing everybody down with, meetings upon meetings, so we can run through checklists live. And again, it goes back to the idea of making, the team more efficient. Let's allow people to be out there doing instead of, be on a Zoom or be on the phone reporting. So I think, in our infancy right now, that's been the most useful component. And then I think with that, with our system that we've worked on with you guys, we've created, a reporting function too. So we've, built in the connection to Conga and, put that into our program too. So, I mean, like most any business, we have reporting requirements. We've got to report to our investors at the end of every month, every quarter. And, always that process was a 7 to 10 day process. Everybody on the team collecting that information, dropping it into PowerPoint slides before we click send and send it off. But with what we're now doing in Salesforce, we've got the ability that so long as everybody is doing their work within Salesforce, to click a button whenever it's time to report, and it just automatically generates all that information for us.
Yeah. There was a really important point to everything that you had just said, which is walk before you can run. Because what you just talked about, tasks, workflow, process improvement, reporting, that's a small piece, well, albeit very important, but it's a small piece of everything that you guys are looking to do. And when you're rolling out all these different technologies, it's time consuming. There's a lot of Q&A that goes back and forth. There's a lot of change management that goes back and forth, user acceptance testing, the training, of course, like we talked about earlier, making sure that everybody knows how to use the system. So rolling tools out, piece by piece, making sure that everybody's aware of it. They know what to do inside of the system. It typically actually allows you to gather better feedback, be more efficient through the build, because I've seen clients also say, I need this to be perfect before we get it live. And they spend so much time over these minute details. And then when the system actually goes live, those things that they were so focused in on are typically not even used. So it's better to get it into the hands of the end users, get some more feedback. And then that's how you could roll something out that's actually going to hit what people need to do inside of the system. Because like we've talked about, you're not going to get people to not use Excel. You're not going to get people to stop using Outlook. And that's not the goal of this. It's to make Salesforce be something that centralizes and then improves upon the entire process, optimizes the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think you guys took a great approach with us, through the user authorized testing phase, and making sure that we had, a wide selection of various professionals in our group from all of our different disciplines weighing in and helping with the process. And, then not focusing on launching again when everything was 100% perfect, but recognizing when it was time to roll out and start using and working through problems as they came up.
Yeah. Because we've learned also, right? Like we've been through plenty of projects where we were also on that same wavelength of like, we need this perfect before it's live. And then everybody's definition of what perfect actually is gets pretty muddied as you're getting towards the end of that project. And so sometimes it could delay everything actually being live and out to the clients. Yeah. There's actually a good question that Tony threw in that is related to everything data related. So let me read this off here real quick.
Yep.
Tony's question was about developing a unified picture of your company's data. Is there an executive or a team that becomes responsible for data architect, a chief data architect, a data architecture team? So, Josh, this one's right over to you. Is if not, like if there's not a specific data team or architect, is there someone that's responsible for this or defining the data that the organization owns and what's important to draw out?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the answer kind of varies as to, what size of company you are. Again, like I said, I've worked for, the largest of large publicly traded developers. And I've worked for small private developers. And then, the current company I work for is kind of somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And some companies have, especially the larger ones have entire, IT departments that manage all this stuff. And frankly, would manage the development of the software like I've been doing, for the past year. At my current company, we don't have that group. We've got, a third-party IT firm that helps us with our day-to-day management. But, for our process, what we did and kind of set ourselves up to do a year ago when we started this was I put together a committee of various professionals within our organization. So myself being a developer, and recognizing the audience here, I'm not a software developer, I'm a real estate developer. I pulled together people within our company who are construction professionals, who are architects, who are CPAs in our accounting group, who are part of our internal operations team, basically from all the different, to use the term, silos of our company, to be a part of the process and to say what information is important to you, what processes do you need to see. And then it's kind of been my job just to kind of aggregate it, quarterback it, and kind of see that process through.
Yeah. That almost brings back to the first point you made about the few data points that are important to the Malcolm Gladwell example as well.
Right.
So having each one of those owners of each line of business or area of the business say, this is what's important to us. So Tony, to answer that question, you don't necessarily need a data team or an architect team. Sometimes leveraging or promoting business process owners, executive stakeholders, executive sponsors in each one of those silos should be sufficient. And then you could work with an external IT firm. We here at Plative, not necessarily an external IT firm, but we could of course help you realize and bring everything together. But that's where you have those business process owners that could tell you what's important to them to then allow them to do their job a little bit better. One other question here that I have, it's actually one of the ones that we had written down, is we've talked so much about data, and I hope that everybody understands how important that is. We're thinking about everything Salesforce related. What kind of real estate data services are you guys utilizing? There's so many that are out there. And are any of them actually integrated into Salesforce?
Some of them are now as part of our build, and some of them will be in the future. Again, the walk before you can run philosophy. Yeah. So, I don't know how many real estate professionals are on this call, but, we kind of use all the typical ones. We use CoStar, LoopNet, all the various other data points, Landshark, things like that, for, acquisition opportunities, due diligence, things like that. We use MRI, Yardi, Sage, all the various Microsoft products, SharePoint, things like that. And so right now we have integrated, and as a big part of it, Sage for the budget management component, which does also our invoice processing. We're using a lot of the Microsoft Office stuff. We'll create, a template schedule in Microsoft Project, and then upload that and then manage it within Salesforce and the Milestones PM Plus module. We've got DocuSign integrated for our approvals process. We've got Conga integrated for our reporting process. So, I take from that, my original point that there's 100 different pieces of software, excuse me, and they tend to be very siloed and never communicating with each other. And what we're trying to do here is create that environment where they do communicate.
Exactly. There's so many different tools that are out there, and Salesforce is really just the centerpiece of all of it. With what you're just talking about here too, my mind immediately goes to the idea of the centralized system. I already asked you the question about the remote work, but is there a specific area where you feel like Salesforce might actually be a tool that can help during this economic uncertainty, through this recession? Is there something where, or perceived recession, is there actually something where Salesforce could help out through this process at the tail end? Is it process improvement? Is it going to simplify anything process related that will actually help see you guys through this?
I think it gives us, a better way to Sorry, George, you froze there for a second. I was just wondering. So it gives us a better way to visualize, I think, what the future holds. I've talked about that, we have all these various pieces of software, and you might get one report, if you're, a CEO, C-suite decision maker, you get one report on, all the various loans we have outstanding, and then another report on, what leases are out on certain spaces, and another report on, what is the current status of the budget. And then you may not get those reports in real time. Again, you may have to pick up the phone and call somebody. But I think where Salesforce can help in that is obviously, again, aggregating everything into one common dashboard and helping us make decisions that are based on all the various data points.
Great.
And then, part of this process, and it can be unfortunate, obviously, is as we go through, tough economic times, obviously we can have reductions in force. And so as you lose headcount, how can you be more efficient via software and replace, some of the, the more administrative tasks that you might have delegated.
Yeah. That's actually a great place really to wrap all of this up. Not reduction in force, but thinking about everything data related and process improvement, because that's really the name of the game with all of this. I don't see any other pre-written down questions, and we had answered that one about the data teams, which I found to be pretty important. So, we could wrap here. Josh, thank you so much for your time. I do want to say, if anybody wants to learn more about Gemdale, check out their website, gemdaleusa.com. And also, I'll be at Dreamforce if anybody else here is going to be there. If you're interested in connecting with myself, I'm not all that impressive, or someone else over here at the Plative side, you can absolutely connect with us. Feel free to book a meeting with us as well. And of course, as you guys receive any of the follow-up emails, a link to book a meeting directly on my calendar will be available. So everybody, I appreciate you guys giving us 30 minutes of your time here. We'll wrap here. And Josh, once again, thank you so much for your time, man.
Yeah, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. And to all the participants, thank you guys for taking a little bit of time out of your day.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.